Samuel has been seen as one in which the Mosaic covenant kind of ended in failure. But there is a new beginning on Mount Zion. In a minute, we'll look at parts of Psalm 78, which expresses this. And in a sense, the Mosaic covenant is pushed into the background, at least temporarily. Despite David's failures and the failures of other kings, there arose the hope of a future Messiah or a present king who would establish God's kingdom, reunite the tribes, and restore Jerusalem. Ambiguity of all of this is that there is always tension from the tribes and from that original confederacy of tribes, where a certain independence of the tribes was held to. There are those who have seen that the people are no longer bound by covenant allegiance to Yahweh at a central sanctuary, but bound politically on the basis of contract between the king and the people. One could say between a covenant between the king and the people, and conflict is going to arise between these two conceptions. Let's look at this, the way this is expressed in Psalm 78. What has happened is that throughout the book of Judges, the people have put God to the test and rebelled against the Most High. And again, they do not keep his laws and statutes. They are not faithful. They go after other gods. And we have here in 60 and 61, he abandoned the tabernacle of Shiloh, the tent he had set up among humans. He sent the ark of his might into captivity, his splendor into the hands of the enemy. But then it talks of the Lord awaking from sleep, as of from sleep. He rejected the tents of Joseph. He did not choose the tribe of Ephraim, but he chose the tribe of Judah, Mount Zion, which he loved. He built his sanctuary like the heights, like the earth that he established forever. He chose David his servant and took him from the sheep pens. And David shepherded them with integrity of heart, with skillful hands he led them. There is a pattern that plays out throughout the Bible, especially throughout the accounts of the kings, where often things will get off to a good start, and then something goes wrong. And so with David. He begins his rule with victories and with justice, as we see in 2 Samuel 8. And then he seems to become complacent, presumptuous, and neglecting of royal responsibilities. And as this happens, there is resentment among the tribes with what they call his tyranny. He is beset by troubles at court, including spoiled sons, an indulged wife. So why is David not rejected? For the sake of the covenant that we saw in 2 Samuel 7, David is punished but not rejected. However, God's promise to David is under threat. One by one, the various heirs to the throne drop out. This is similar to the pattern we find in Genesis, where promises are made by God, and then there are a series of threats or questions. How will the promise be fulfilled? A lot of the troubles stem from the story of Bathsheba. And this story and his behavior in it involves a distortion of kingship, And all of David's troubles from then on are seen as God's judgment on David. There is, first of all, the rape of Tamar by Amnon, the crown prince. In retaliation for that, Absalom kills Amnon, as Tamar is his full sister. David, however, having done nothing about the rape, punishes Absalom instead. Then Absalom revolts and takes over the kingship. He is crowned at Hebron. He takes Jerusalem. He sleeps with David's concubines, which is designed to indicate that he is taking over as king. Absalom is then murdered by Joab, making the second in line for the throne dead. There is much intrigue and treachery in regard to the succession. And in addition, there is a revolt of the northern tribes under Sheva, and David ends up pathetic and brokenhearted. In order to understand Absalom's revolt, we have to look at a couple of different passages. One of those is Psalm 82. God has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of the gods he holds judgment. How long will you judge unjustly and show partiality to the wicked? Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk about in darkness. All the foundations of the earth are shaken. I say, you are God, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, you shall die like men and fall like any prince. Arise, O God, judge the earth, for to thee belong all the nations. This underlines that the foundation of being a ruler is justice, rescuing the weak and needy, and delivering them from the hand of the wicked. Giving justice to the weak and the fatherless, maintaining the right of the afflicted and the destitute. When Absalom begins his revolt against David, he begins by standing outside the gate. And when any man had a suit to come before the king for judgment, Absalom would call to him and say, "From what city are you?" And when he said, "Your servant is of such and such a tribe in Israel," Absalom would say to him, "See, your claims are good and right, but there is no man deputed by the king to hear you." And he would say, "Oh, that I were judge in the land, then every man with a suit or cause might come to me, and I would give him justice." So Absalom is accusing David of not doing justice. We see also in the legend of kurta, a Ugaritic text from about 1200 BC, which has a similar theme. And in it, kurta is accused of letting his hand fall into mischief, judging not the cause of the widow, nor adjudicating the case of the wretched, not driving out those that prey on the poor, not feeding the fatherless or the widow. Instead, he has been on his sick bed and not carrying out his duties as king. And his son at that point says, "Descend from the kingship, I'll reign. Descend from your authority, I'll sit enthroned." So, as in Psalms And as in the legend of Kurta, David is seen to be a poor king, and therefore Absalom feels like he can depose him and he himself take the throne and do justice on the king as a good king. Now, the chronicler's view of David is a much more positive one. The chronicler sees David as more heroic. Negative events are left out. There is little regarding David's struggles with Saul or service to the Philistines or the succession narrative or Bathsheba or the rebellions. David instead is presented as an organizer of temple worship, staff, Levitical functionaries. The explanation of why David is not to build a temple is that as a warrior, he has shed too much blood. And we will see this passage a little bit later. By the way, a note here, when we say temple cult, this is not cult as it is used today to talk about an offbeat or isolated group of people following a charismatic leader. Rather, cult in Old Testament literature simply is the worship system. It's a very benign, neutral word. Here is the passage from Chronicles, which gives the reason that David is not to build a temple. David said to Solomon, "My son, I had planned to build a house to the name of the Lord my God, but the word of the Lord came to me, saying, You have shed much blood and have waged great wars. You shall not build a house to my name, because you have shed so much blood in my sight on the earth." And then he talks about a son being born, "For his name shall be Solomon, Shlomo, and I will give peace, Shalom, and quiet to Israel in his days. He shall build a house for my name." There's a play of words here between the word Solomon and the word for peace, Shalom.